Welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast. We know that when you're looking at complex sectors, especially resource companies, the sheer amount of data can feel, well, overwhelming. Our mission is to sift through all the recent research, the notes, the filings for one specific company and just lay out the core facts, the connections, and yeah, the risks for you. Think of it as a shortcut to getting up to speed. Today, we are focusing on critical metals. This company is right in the thick of that whole critical mineral supply chain discussion everyone's having. And the question we're tackling, it comes from materials a listener sent over, is pretty direct. Is critical metals actually a good buy right now? Or is the risk just, too much? We're going to try and unpack the huge potential upside of their main asset, but also put it right alongside some, frankly, pretty serious risks. We'll focus on the key catalysts coming up just in the rest of this year, and also touch on those speculative wildcards that could really swing the price. Either way, really. Before we jump in, if you find this analysis useful, please do remember to subscribe, maybe like the video, and leave a comment below. Seriously, if there's a specific company you want us to look into next time, just drop the name in the comments. We really do use your suggestions. Okay, let's get into this. It's quite a story. This company is essentially a play on one single massive asset, the Tanbreeze green rare earth mine. It's definitely attracted a lot of attention. But what's been happening operationally lately? What news has really been driving the market feeling, say, over the past 3 months?
Well, what's really interesting here is how the physical progress on the ground seems to be matching some of the hype. The key thing coming out of recent reports isn't just that they're drilling, it's the quality of what they're finding. That's the real story. They just announced the final results from drilling they did throughout 2024. And these results confirm, well, what you can really only describe as exceptional rare earth element grades. When we talk about total rare earth oxide, TREO, the grades were confirmed consistently between 0.40% and 0.42%.
Okay, 0.40%. That sounds like a technical number, but maybe for the listener, what does that actually mean in the context of rare earths globally? Is that just average, or is that genuinely stand out?
Oh, it's absolutely not standard, not even close, especially when you're talking alder rock deposits. Many large established projects out there really struggle to consistently hit even 0.20%, maybe 0.30% a TREO. So when you start seeing grades above 0.40%, that translates pretty directly, actually, into much lower processing costs down the line for each ton of final product. It basically makes the whole operation potentially much more economically robust, and it's a big if. They can get it financed and built, and it gets even better. The heavy rare earth component, that's the really valuable stuff, often dominated by Chinese supply. That's confirmed at around 26% of the total TREO. That ratio, the heavy rare earth oxide, or HREO, that's where the real strategic value of Tanbreeze comes in. These are the elements you need for defense tech, high-end electronics. So yeah, this physical discovery, it strongly supports a pretty bullish long-term view for future output.
Okay, so the quality of the resource itself, the dirt, is confirmed. That's step one, a big one. But what about the project timeline? Are they actually hitting the marks needed to get this thing permitted and financed? Because, great grades don't mean much if you can't actually dig them up.
Right. Execution is key. And they seem to be hitting some crucial milestones there, too. They announced they passed the 70% completion mark on the Bankable Feasibility Study, the BFS, for Tanbreeze.
The BFS, that's the big engineering document, right? The one the banks look at.
Exactly. It's the blueprint that potential financiers, banks, governments, whoever will use to decide if they're going to lend the serious money needed. So hitting 70% keeps them on track for that Q4 delivery this year, which is important. They also managed to complete key environmental baseline sampling back in August.
Okay.
Now, that might sound a bit bureaucratic, but it's a critical regulatory step for getting environmental approval in Greenland. You just don't get your permit without that data. So these steps, they show management is, ticking the boxes on the checklist.
And were the institutions, the big money, starting to notice these execution steps before all this news became public? Was smart money kind of moving in already?
Yes, definitely. The source materials we looked at indicate reports surfaced back in August showing increased investment activity. And this wasn't just, retail excitement. It was coming from thematic resource funds, some specific ETFs. That signals growing institutional interest. They were clearly trying to position themselves ahead of that BFS completion announcement. And this actually led to more market speculation back in July around an expected mid-year resource update. That speculation directly drove up trading volumes and volatility. So the market was already reacting to perceived progress even before the company confirmed those final September drilling results.
Interesting.
Yeah, it tells you the stock is highly sensitive to any operational news, good or bad.
Okay, so resource quality looks good. The feasibility study is getting close to the finish line. That covers the operational side. What about the calendar then? What specific dates or events should investors be watching for just in the next 3 months? The stuff that could really move the needle short term.
Right. If we connect this to the immediate future, the Q4 schedule is pretty packed. It's full of events that are going to act as critical tests, really, for both management's execution and how the market feels about it. These are the deadlines, the reports that are likely to inject some volatility. So looking at the Q4 roadmap, first up, you've got the regular earnings cycle, the Q3 earnings release. Probably mid-October, maybe October 15th is the target. That's going to give us the clearest picture of their current funding situation, their cash runway, and crucially, their cash burn rate.
Since they're pre-revenue, that report is basically just a health check on their bank account, right? How much time they have left.
Pretty much. How much credit they have before they absolutely need another cash infusion. Then you have more technical drivers. Towards the end of October, around the 29th, there are some high-profile ETF rebalancing events. Potential inclusion in large mining or resource ETFs, even if it's a small allocation, could drive pretty significant passive investment flows. That bumps liquidity into the stock almost regardless of the project status itself.
Interesting.
Then moving into November, around the 24th, we get the reported institutional buys, those 13F filings we mentioned. This is really important because it confirms whether those accumulation trends we saw hinted at back in August are actually continuing among the big funds. So if a major resource fund loaded up in Q3, that adds a lot of credibility.
Right.
And then the really big project milestone, the target date for that crucial BFS submission. That's set for mid-December, maybe December 12th. That's the management basically lays all its cards on the table for the financial world. The market will react probably dramatically to whether they hit that date or if there's any hint of a delay.
So the BFS submission and the Q3 earnings are the big fundamental project updates. But it's fascinating how much things like institutional buying and potential ETF inclusion could move the stock completely separately from the actual mine development. That feels like pure momentum chasing.
Exactly. And it really highlights the sort of binary nature of this investment right now. You've got the fundamental story, the quality of the ore in the ground, and then you have this technical market story, which can be driven entirely by passive flows, just hoping to ride the green energy wave. Both sides have huge implications for the stock price in the near term.
Okay, this is where the story takes a sharp turn and where it gets, well, really interesting and, frankly, a lot riskier. Let's dig into the financial reality. What is the actual fundamental financial state of critical metals right now?
Yeah, this brings up a really essential question about risk tolerance for anyone looking at this. The simple answer is it's extremely high risk. The company is, as we said, pre-revenue. Their last annual report for fiscal year 2024 just reported revenue as NA, non-applicable. And they continue to report net losses because of all the operational and exploration spending. Right now, every single dollar they spend on drilling, on finishing that BFS, on paying their staff, it's all negative cash flow.
Burning cash.
Aggressively burning cash to prove up the asset. They aren't making any money. Think of it like a biotech with no approved drug, or maybe a tech startup trying to build some huge complex factory basically on a credit card. It's a pure play on hope, really. Hope that the next round of funding comes through before the cash runs out.
So they're completely dependent on outside money to keep the lights on, and more importantly, to actually fund the massive jump from just exploration to real mine development. How are they planning to bridge that huge financing gap?
Well, they have secured one piece of positive news on that front. It's a non-binding letter of interest, an LOI, from the U.S. Export-Import Bank, the EXIM Bank. It's for possible project financing of up to $120 million. This is definitely a positive signal. It shows political and strategic interest in the U.S. in securing a Western source of rare earths.
Okay, but non-binding sounds tentative.
It is. This LOI is just that, an expression of interest. It is not finalized funding, and it's entirely conditional on them successfully completing that BFS to EXIM's satisfaction and EXIM doing its own due diligence. So getting that LOI signed was a short-term catalyst, absolutely. But the uncertainty around actually closing that $120 million deal, that is a massive risk factor just hanging over the stock right now.
We've definitely seen these kinds of letters of interest fall apart before, especially for big, expensive projects outside the U.S. mainland. What assurances do investors have? Or is this LOI mostly just, window dressing to maybe attract other partners?
The sources we reviewed suggest treating it mainly as strategic leverage for now rather than guaranteed cash. It signals that Western governments are interested in locking down this resource, and that makes it easier for critical metals to talk to other potential commercial partners or financiers. However, the operational hurdles, the regulatory requirements that EXIM Bank demands are very high. If that BFS comes out in December and shows costs or timelines that are outside Agium's comfort zone, that LOI could just evaporate.
Hmm.
So the clock is kicking towards that December BFS submission to really validate the potential loan.
And speaking of major risks, there's an even bigger, more concrete issue looming that involves ownership and could directly hit existing shareholders, right? I'm talking about the risk of dilution.
Absolutely. This, for me, is perhaps the single biggest risk factor for anyone holding the stock right now because it directly impacts the value of each share they own. So Critical Metals currently owns 42% of the Tanbreeze project. They have a plan, an option really, to invest $10 million by the end of 2025. If they do that, it secures them the right to raise their ownership dramatically up to 92.5%.
Okay, that sounds great on the surface, right? Taking control of this amazing asset. But there's a catch.
A very big catch. The devil is absolutely in the details of how they pay for that increased stake. Crucially, exercising that option requires them to issue brand new equity, new shares, valued at $116 million, directly to the current majority owner of Tanbreeze.
Wait, $116 million in new equity. If the company's whole market cap isn't massively larger than that, issuing $116 million worth of new shares, that could crush existing shareholders, couldn't it? Can we maybe quantify that potential pain?
That's the critical point, yes. If they go ahead and exercise that option, it creates massive dilution risk. Let's just use some round numbers to illustrate. Say the company currently has, 100 million shares outstanding, and the share price is hovering around $6.70 like it was recently. That puts the market cap around $670 million. Now, issuing $116 million in new equity at that price means they'd suddenly create roughly 17 million new shares and hand them over to the original Tanbreeze owner.
Wow.
That's roughly a 17% dilution hitting existing shareholders almost overnight. And that's before they even secure the much larger external project financing needed to actually build the mine. It fundamentally changes the risk profile. It turns what looks like a high-potential asset play into a potentially serious dilution gamble for current investors.
Okay, that's sobering. Shifting gears slightly, let's look at the technical chart side. What are the indicators saying right now? Does the price action reflect this high volatility and risk we've just been talking about?
Yes, the technicals absolutely confirm the high volatility and, right now, a lack of sustained positive momentum. The stock closed recently, as you said, $6.70. If we look at the key moving averages, the 50-day is nearby, maybe $6.80, but the longer-term 200-day average is up near $7.20. So the price is currently trading below both, which reflects that slight downtrend we've seen since the summer highs, back when speculation was really peaking.
More momentum indicators.
More importantly, the technical indicators show no strong momentum currently. The MAN-ED, the moving average divergence, it recently crossed below its signal line. That's a classic technical signal suggesting a short-term bearish tone, some weakness following the recent news cycle. It really suggests market uncertainty, which aligns perfectly with the tricky financial picture we just outlined.
Okay, so beyond the scheduled stuff, the BFS deadline, the excess LOI decision, that dilution deadline, the source material also highlighted some, let's call them high-impact rumors. These are the real speculative catalysts, the wild cards, that could potentially send the valuation soaring if they actually happened. Let's talk about those high-risk, high-reward possibilities.
Right, these are the things bubbling under the surface. There seem to be four major speculative drivers that investors are watching closely, and they're all kind of tied to the bigger strategic picture for rare earths globally, moving beyond just the company's internal execution challenges. First, there's strategic acquisition interest. There are these persistent industry rumors, whispers really, suggesting a major multinational mining firm is quietly doing due diligence, evaluating a bid to maybe acquire a minority stake, say 10% or 20%.
And is this chatter about traditional Western mining majors, or are we maybe looking at state-owned entities trying to lock down supply agreements?
The focus of the rumor seems to be on Western players, largely because of the strategic geopolitical angle of Tanbreeze being a significant potential non-Chinese source. For a big miner, taking a minority stake could be a relatively inexpensive way to get their foot in the door and secure long-term rights, called offtake agreements, for those really valuable heavy rare earths. And they could do it without having to take on the enormous risk of financing the entire project themselves.
Right.
If that rumor actually materializes, if a major validates the project by buying in, that's a huge boost for the stock's credibility. Second, there's the supply chain initiative rumor. Market chatter keeps popping up about critical metals potentially being included in some kind of U.S. or allied government-backed rare earth supply chain program.
That would be a massive de-risking event, wouldn't it, if the government basically steps in?
Absolutely. Getting included in a program like that could potentially secure future guaranteed offtake agreements. That means they'd have a customer committed to buying their product, maybe at a fixed price, years before the mine even starts producing. That would drastically improve their chances of actually closing that Exim Bank financing we talked about. The third driver is more technical, market-related, ETF fast-track inclusion. There's active speculation that critical metals might get fast-tracked into a new commodities ETF, one focused specifically on critical minerals and supply chain security.
Ah, so more passive money potentially flowing in quickly.
Exactly. It would just be a pure liquidity driver, forcing passive funds to buy the stock, again, somewhat independent of immediate project news. And then finally, the fourth wild card is the Greenland policy shift rumor. There are these unconfirmed reports suggesting the Greenlandic government itself might be considering ways to accelerate regulations to specifically support critical minerals projects like Tanbreeze.
Given how notoriously slow and complex mine permitting usually is, especially in sensitive areas, a political shortcut from the government, maybe streamlining the process, that could pull the whole project timeline forward dramatically. That feels like the ultimate wild card.
It really is. It could potentially override years of typical execution delays if the political will is there. Very speculative, but high impact if true.
Okay, let's try and pull all this together then for the listener who's considering taking a position right now. We've got this company, pre-revenue, sitting on a potentially massive high-grade asset, those green rare earths, but, and it's a big but, they're facing really significant execution risk. They constantly need more capital, and there's that huge looming potential for major shareholder dilution.
Yeah, the analysis really points towards what we call a highly binary outcome, meaning it's likely to be either a huge success or, well, a catastrophic failure. There doesn't seem to be much comfortable middle ground here. The positives, they're undeniable. You get strategic asset exposure through Tanbreeze, the grades look exceptional, and you have those powerful long-term macro trends for rare earths driven by electrification and, frankly, geopolitics. However, the negatives, especially in the short term, they feel overwhelming. They are pre-revenue, they're reporting persistent losses, they're heavily dependent on external financing that absolutely isn't guaranteed yet, and most pressingly, there's that major dilution risk tied to securing full ownership of Tanbreeze. Management basically needs to execute flawlessly over the next 3 to 6 months.
So in summary, the material we reviewed rates this opportunity as highly speculative. If a listener does decide to jump in, what should they really keep front of mind about the investment horizon and managing the risk here?
It's assessed primarily as a highly speculative trade based on news flow and rumors in the short term. It's kind of a game of chasing momentum, maybe trying to get ahead of that potential dilution event. For the longer term, it's really only suitable for investors with an extremely high tolerance for risk, investors who fully understand and are willing to accept the pre-revenue status and that significant potential dilution. Ultimately, the success of any investment here is entirely contingent on project development milestones being hit and, crucially, funding being secured. The financial structure right now suggests the risk might be disproportionate to the current potential reward, which is why the overall rating rationale provided in the source material was, only a 4 out of 10. The investor here is betting almost entirely on management's ability to navigate both the financing world and the political landscape simultaneously. It's a tough needle to thread. What really stands out here is how the geopolitical context seems to be almost overriding some of the typical mining risks. Even if critical metals somehow successfully navigates all the financing hurdles and that dilution threat, they still operate in a fiercely competitive, extremely capital-intensive sector. And the price for rare earths themselves can be inherently volatile. High geopolitical risks are just part of the game.
Okay, so let's leave our listener with a final provocative thought to chew on. While so much of the focus right now is understandably on the project's execution risk, can they finish the BFS on time? Can they actually secure the money to build the mine? How much might the shifting global market for rare earths, specifically these huge trends toward reshoring supply chains, government intervention in the US and Europe, how much might that ultimately override the company's specific internal financing struggles? Could those geopolitical tailwinds become so strong that they almost force this project towards success, perhaps despite its current financial weaknesses? Something to definitely mull over as you watch all those critical Q4 developments unfold.